Welcome, welcome, welcome to Shepherd's Podcast. I'm your host, Jefferson.
And I'm Kenji.
Today we got an awesome guest. We got Mark Cheng, director, film director, animator, producer, former Nickelodeon executive. He's an astronaut, and I think he walked Mars. Welcome, Mark. Good to have you, brother.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. It's good to hear your voices. Always like hanging out and chatting with you guys and making stuff with you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, man. So, we do things pretty casual and just want to give people some insight into the life of Mark Cheng and, hopefully people can walk away with some good info and, some entertainment, good laughs. And so, I did my best to give you a good intro, but, by all means, man, tell people a little bit about your journey and about where you come from and all that kind of stuff. So, because we're big fans of yours and we love to share so other people can become fans too. So, give them the lowdown, brother.
Oh, my gosh. Sure. Where to start? I think if I had to trace it all back, it's sixth grade when my dad had a VHS camcorder and started to make kung fu movies with my friends in the backyard, and just pretending we're like kung fu heroes or superheroes, or I think we did a couple of James Bond spoofs and just had a blast, pretending, doing make-believe. And then college was kind of that turning point where you're I was pursuing being a government major, I think, and then started to meet other people that were film majors or animators or pursuing art degrees, and I'm like, oh wow, you could do that as a career, oh my god, and switched over to film as a film major. Then you get launched out into the world, and you're like, all right, how do I make films? How do I work in this business? And started working as a production assistant, a lowly entry-level position, where you're doing things from anywhere from loading the prop truck to feeding extras and stuff that you're like, is this really related to film production? It doesn't really feel like it. I'm like, no way. I don't want to do any of this. Forget this. And I started to do web design, and web design at the time was a really cool, you're like, oh wow, I could use my art and it would be out there on the internet and people would actually see it, and you almost get that experience of creating something and having other people look at it, and that was a huge draw at the time. And we're talking back when YouTube launched, ages ago. As my kids say, what was life like in the 1900s? And you're like, oh, well, I remember when YouTube started and we were making small little videos and putting it up there and thinking it was going to change the world and all that stuff. And so, it was in that era where I started to learn more about web design and different types of multimedia technology that's already ancient, Flash and Macromedia and ways to put video games on the web.
Flash.
Remember that? Flash games and
Dreamweaver.
Oh, the good old days. I do remember working on some of those.
So, that was around early 2000s when I was making Flash games and working on web design, and my day job was working in finance. And around that time, I got a call from headhunter, and at that point, the job market was so hot that these headhunters, they weren't even telling you what jobs, what companies were hiring. They were just telling you the type of job. And this woman was so cryptic about this job. She's like, oh well, would leverage your multimedia background, your film background, technology. If you're interested, it's with a really big company. I can't tell you what the name of the company is, but if you're interested, just be in. She said something like, be in Times Square at 2 p.m. on Thursday, and I'm going to call you 5 minutes before the interview and tell you where to go. That's how hot the job market was back then, because these headhunters were so afraid that other headhunters would catch wind of these positions and steal, try to get candidates in before them. So I remember being in a coffee shop in Times Square, waiting for this phone call, and the headhunter calls and she's like, you're going to go down the block into the Viacom offices and tell them that you have an interview with MTV and Nickelodeon. And I was like, oh my God, like, holy crap, this is the name of the company? And like I went in there, and that was the big pivot. You know, that was when I started working for Nickelodeon and left the world of finance behind me. And I would almost go back to that particular point in time as to when my creative career really started to take off, because I started to work at I started what would end up being a 13, 14-year career at Nickelodeon back then.
And that was their heyday, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and then so
yeah, go ahead.
I was at the Nickelodeon, and we were, you know, updating the web pages. You know, back then there was very little multimedia. We were trying to push the envelope, but just the internet and the bandwidth just wasn't there yet. So, you know, to almost put it in perspective, we were uploading black and white JPEG images of Nickelodeon characters so that kids and parents could go to our website and like print the black and white JPEG so their kids could color it in. Like, that was the extent of, like, you know, the Nickelodeon experience online. And I started doing that, and then as, you know, technology started to change so rapidly, went from putting videos online, I started to work on Nickelodeon games as multimedia games started to come out. And yeah, spent like 13 years there, and then from web games, all of a sudden, Steve Jobs announces like the iPad, and overnight, like the attention of our department went from websites to apps. It was all like native apps. There's going to be an app store one day, and we're going to make apps for our games. And you know, it's so interesting. Like kids growing up these days, it's just obvious that you download these games in the app store, right? But back then, it was this fantastic pivotal transformation that I got to witness and be a part of, you know, at the Nickelodeon level, where almost overnight you'd see entire budgets, like web budgets, get canceled and then totally reallotted to native apps and iPad and Apple ecosystems, and then Android ecosystems, and then Kindles. And so, you know, I was kind of in a very interesting position at the company to kind of witness the emergence of all that take place.
Wow.
Incredible, man.
Yeah,
it was cool. Like, you know, the older audience members will remember Flash technology as an Adobe technology that allowed people to play games online, you know, on the web. And as a result, you know, Nickelodeon had a very close relationship with Adobe. We'd have those guys come in all the time. We would almost exchange information. We would tell them what we were seeing on our side in terms of what aspects of the technology were really interesting and compelling, and what we were using to build games, and what we thought our kid audience wanted and liked and enjoyed about that technology. And then in turn, Adobe would tell us, you know, the latest advancements in Flash tech that they were working on and what was coming down the pipe, you know, with Flash version 3 and Flash version 4. So a very, you know, for a number of years, very close relationship with Adobe. And I just remember this pivotal point when apps started to get really, really big, and Adobe just basically told us, like, yeah, you know, we're thinking of we're going to sunset Flash. We're going to move away from that because the world is really moving on, and native apps and games are kind of the future of online digital entertainment. And I just remember I had spent years, like, you know, almost a decade working with Multimedia Flash, even before Adobe had it, and it was under developed by a company called Macromedia, and we're like, wow, like the world is changing, like right before our eyes, like new technologies, new technology players in the field. You know, Apple became so big, and Adobe's Flash, you know, started to decline. All sorts of things at that time. It was just a wonderful time to be a witness to all that. A witness and a party to the whole thing, you know?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, man, 100%.
I worked in Flash too. You know, when I was working in gaming, and like, I mean, then it all went to apps at that point, and I was just like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Hey, switching gears. Let's go over here now.
So crazy. Yeah, and you know, the other advancement at that time was the introduction of, like, you know, touch pads and just touch controls, right? Like pinching and zooming with your fingers. Like, I just remember this period of time at Nickelodeon where we had been so focused on mouse clicks and how to maneuver and play games with keyboard and a mouse, and then when the iPad came on the scene and we started to see our kid audience start to adopt and migrate to touch screens, it was just this fantastic revolution in like the UX UI world and how to create user experiences and control mechanisms with touching and swiping and all of that. And it really just overnight started to rewrite and change the way we all thought about games and experiences and audiences. Prior to touch screens, we a lot of times had to rely on the parent of the child to kind of explain to the kid how to use it, or like what keyboard controls and how to use a mouse. But like suddenly the kids were just like, they would grab the iPad and just start swiping and intuitively learn how to maneuver around that interface. So that's a great time to be part of that, what we call the intersection of entertainment and technology.
Oh, that's beautiful. And so that led to you making your first feature, right? You directed a movie?
Yeah, so spending a decade there was fantastic and really privileged to be working with such people and work on such big projects. But I started to also develop or revisit my passion in just telling stories and telling what they call linear stories, or movies. And so for about maybe 3 years while I was at Nickelodeon, I spent about 3 years producing my first feature film. And the way I kind of did that was I'd film on the weekends, I'd film at night, I would use my my summer vacations, my 2 weeks of vacation to just go shoot on set somewhere. And so it took about 3 years to make my first feature film. Shot on my own, put a skeleton crew together, did all the post-production, taught myself visual effects. And so I produced a film called Ghost Source Zero, like a cyberpunk action film. We're lucky enough to have Sony Home Entertainment Pictures pick it up as one of their digital releases. And that was something that I did on my own while I was at Nickelodeon. But I think through that experience, I kind of realized that was really my calling. Like, I had a fantastic run at Nickelodeon, working with big teams and running a department and managing budgets for them. But really wanted to get back to the basics and back to what I call the circle of creation. That point on set between actors, directors, cinematographers, where you're actually putting a story together and being hands-on, and that kind of that experience and that draw that I felt inside me kind of pushed me to my next chapter, which was to leave Nickelodeon and start to focus on directing and storytelling directly.
Yeah, that's cool. And what was some of the first things that you kind of learned that was different? Because people who are listening don't understand when you're saying I'm working for Nickelodeon MTV. I mean, that's like the creme de la creme bubble, right? And outside that bubble, it's completely different. But inside that bubble, you have everything, right? You have all the resources. You have top people with you everywhere you look. You're, like you said, you're partnered with Adobe. I mean, what were some of the things that you started to learn when you got out of that situation? Now you're out making features and, pushing your stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting, I think you bring up a really good point. People are just like, well, why would you leave something like that? It sounds like you're at the pinnacle and you've made it. Why would you leave? And I think that, my first response was like, hey, that's a really good point. Like, why did I leave? Why didn't I just stay? But I think that, at the end of the day, right, I firmly believe that, the strength of a person or an organization is also directly related to the weaknesses or the challenges, right? Everybody's strengths are also related to their weaknesses. For me, my greatest strength, I think, is my bias towards action. I just want to do stuff. I want to get stuff done, right? my biggest weakness is like planning and sitting down and like organizing like what the strategy is before I actually go do something, right? And, and I'm sure some of your listeners can relate to that, right? If you take that idea and you look at an organization like Nickelodeon, like what is the best? What did I think the best part of Nickelodeon was? Like, I thought the fantastic number of talented people, passionate people, was Nickelodeon's greatest strength. Everybody was just so passionate about getting stuff done, creating stuff. We really, embraced our user and wanted to create a magical world for kids. And I felt like everybody there that I met and worked with really felt that through and through. And so I think that's the greatest strength. What is the greatest weakness, or what did I find the most lacking in that experience was that there was just so many people, and then success becomes a function of how well you can communicate to an army of people what the shared vision is, right? Like, it's like, all right, we're going to execute and build this fantastic new business model or animation or storytelling software. How are we going to do that? We've got a gigantic budget, which is fantastic. We've got hundreds of talented people, which is fantastic. What's the challenge? The challenge is communicating and organizing, coordinating all of those people, and trying to get them to all, focus on what success is, and to move that what is a large ship in that direction. And of course, fantastic things can happen when in success of that, right? But it's a large effort to get all those people. And organize those people and make sure that there's enough knowledge transfer, right? And things like organizational and operational challenges become, where the battle is won or lost, right? In just making sure everybody knows what's going on. And after 13, 14 years of doing that, I really began to feel the desire to scale back and say, well, I don't need to be, one little, cog in the engine. Like, I'd love to try wearing more than one hat, or trying, to work in other areas. And so I think that was the biggest thing for me, that I wanted more of my creative fingerprints on a project. I wanted to have a little bit more creative control. That's not necessarily to say that I thought I could do it better than Nickelodeon could, but like, I wanted to try. I wanted to work those muscles and give myself a shot at that. And so, in the 6 or 7 years since I've left that company, like, I've been working with screenplay writers, working on writing scripts for features and TV series, producing short films, directed a pilot, worked on another animated series, and have done a lot of stuff that I've been really proud of. And they may not have reached the scale of being a Nickelodeon yet, but the fact that I got to do that type of work and got to play the parts that I played was something that I'm incredibly proud of. And you know what, like, at the end of the day, and I know you guys know this, I'm like preaching at the choir, at the end of the day, like, we all want like, our turn. Like, we want to be in the arena and try things out and try our own ideas out and see how they play out, and I think over the years that just became more and more important to be able to do, before quote unquote time runs out for us.
Yeah, beautiful, man.
Yeah, I mean, just to expand on that, like, that's why, like, I connected with you guys so well. Like, when our paths just happened to cross, right? And I, saw in you guys just the passion to create something yourselves, the passion to tell stories the way you wanted to hear them. Like, all of us have walked out of the movie theater after seeing a film with our buddies and spent time in the lobby being like, yo, that was cool, but what about this? Or like, why didn't they do that? Or like, if I were the one making the decision, I would have made the bad guy do this. Or why don't you just shoot that guy like 5 more times before checking on him, like checking on the monster, like just all those things, right? Like, we all just want a shot, our turn to be in the arena and tell these stories and experience these stories and be part of that crew and cast. And so, it's they talk about finding your tribe, and like, I see in you guys that same passion, reflected back, and it's cool being out here working with guys like you.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, it's mutual, my friend.
It's definitely mutual.
Yeah, it's mutual. I mean, you got an animated movie coming out, right?
Yes, sir. So let's see, about 2 years ago. Well, let's back up. So since I left Nickelodeon, my thought was, I want to try my hand at directing and telling stories, and I moved out here to California, here in Los Angeles, and doing things like directing commercials and TV pilots and stuff. But then, bam, like, pandemic hits us, right? And everyone's like, you got to stay at home. Like, don't breathe on anybody. Don't get close to anybody. And all throughout Hollywood, I know you guys saw the same exact thing. Everyone's like, live sets completely locked down, if not canceled indefinitely, right? And so there was almost this panic for the entire industry, but particularly for people like me who are still, consider ourselves trying to break in. And I joined a bunch of like Zoom panels at the time with different unions and different production people. And what I heard was always of the same theme, that like, look, if you want to work in this industry, if you're trying to break into the industry, do not give up hope, but for the next 2 years, and this is when lockdown just happened, but like for the next 2 years, it's going to be rough sailing. We don't know, we'll eventually be back, but we don't know how these next 2 years are going to play out. So like, buckle down, figure out, a game plan. And it was really kind of, the message that I kept hearing was that it's not going to be a matter of weeks or months. It's going to be a matter of like years. And so, I had this almost crisis of purpose. Like, what am I going to do? And I was fortunate enough that at that time I started, movies like TV shows like The Mandalorian started to come out, and they started to talk about this new technology of using what they call real-time game engines to create animation. And one of those pieces of software is the Unreal Engine, which, while it was originally designed to create video games, create and build video games, people were starting to use it to create animated sequences, those animated stories in between game levels, for example. The image quality started to get so good that TV shows like The Mandalorian was using it for backgrounds, and other artists and smaller studios were beginning to use this technology to actually create animated stories. And so I downloaded that, taught myself, kind of set up this own schedule for myself to say, like, every 2 weeks I'm going to try to crank out a 2 to 3 minute story and learn some new aspect of storytelling, whether it's camera or actors or animation, and kind of taught myself. And through that process, started to meet other individuals that were using the software for the same purposes. And that's when I met a bunch of people that were working on an animated film called Max Beyond. They were a small UK studio that basically had the same exact experience I was having about live action being shut down and them trying to continue to tell stories in in whatever way they could. And so through that relationship, became friends with a lot of the creators, and I ended up joining that production and worked on Max Beyond for about 1.5 years. And so Max Beyond is an animated feature film, one of the first films created using Unreal Engine, and I think it just came out like 2 weeks ago on Apple TV, iTunes, Amazon Prime, and go watch it, go check it out. It's a really cool sci-fi action, cyberpunk style, what we call like CG anime, kind of like the need for.
It just blew me away when I saw it online. So I mean, kudos to you and the entire team, because I mean, it looks fantastic. And then,
thank you.
Sure, of course. And you had some other stuff that you've done in the past too with Unreal, like Samurai Redemption, right? The Way of the Ronin. I mean, I
yeah,
that was.
Yeah,
that was badass,
The real interesting thing about it, so I'll tell you about it. Like, I was working on Max Beyond, and I think we had just wrapped production on Max Beyond, and I was like, oh, okay, after 14 months of working on 18 months or whatever it was, working on a single production, I was like, oh, let me try something. I want to try something different. I think I was reading comic books or something, and remember seeing this image of Wolverine with a bunch of samurai swords sticking out of him, and I was like, oh, that looks really cool. And created my own version of that, which was like a bunch of Ronin samurai fighting the Grim Reaper. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like, samurai fighting Grim Reaper, like, that's just so badass, And it was a short little, I think like 2 minute story. Really just, I mean, barely even a story. It was more of like the introduction of a premise of like, samurai, in ancient Japanese culture, the one way to almost the last-ditch effort to retain your honor is to kill yourself, right? To embrace death. And so I kind of threw together this thematic, almost like visual poetry of samurai literally fighting death, which is the Grim Reaper, and set it to music. I hired like a Japanese voice actor and put it all together, and it kind of went viral for a little while. Had a nice moment on Instagram, I think it was. And around that time, a Polish development game studio actually saw it and reached out to me, and they're like, whoa, like, this just struck us as the coolest thing in the world. Like, would you be interested in, like, kind of licensing the idea to us to develop a game? And I was like, of course I would be interested. Like, oh, please, I want to play this game. And so that was kind of like, one of my steps out there, like, after some back and forth, I think there's the Polish company called GDevs. I think it's called GDevs. Yeah. And so they're taking that idea and developing it and trying to put a game together, which would be really, really cool. But yeah, that was my first kind of like, bucket list. Like after Nickelodeon, like someone reaches out to me and says, "Whoa, your IP is really cool. Like we'd like to develop something." And so yeah, that's what Samurai. What was it called? Way of the Ronin, I think it was called. Way of the Ronin. Yeah.
I mean, what's cool? I mean, Mark, both you and I have. I mean, I had an animation background as well as
right.
You and I both know, right? There's always something about it that always the charm, the wonderment, the freedom in being able to kind of create it and not being limited to like the laws of physics, right? Of the normal world, right? Where does your love come from? Developing all these animations and these films and everything. Where'd you find that place to like draw that source out?
Oh, yeah, it's such a good question. I think it comes back to like, when you're a kid and you're in a movie theater watching something with your buddies and something cool, you see something cool together, whether it's a monster or an action set piece or some guy, back in the day when we were little, like Schwarzenegger said some like cool one-liner, and you just look at your buddies and you're like, dude, like that was so cool, right? And you just kind of like feel it and you just can't stop smiling, right? It goes back to that, and in animation, as well as, everyone has their own medium, but I think there's something about animation, whether it's traditional cel-drawn animation or 3D animation, but action in general, like where you put a sequence together and you just know, like it just kind of speaks to you, right? Whether it's you get goosebumps or you're like, oh, I got to show this to somebody, and like we're both going to have this like human shared experience where we look at each other and be like, and like nod and be like, dude, like this is really cool, right? And you start giggling because it's just so awesome, right? Like, I think you guys know what I mean, right? So it's harder to be more articulate about what that passion is, other than that story I just told of like wanting to connect with people and be like, hey, isn't this cool? And it's not necessarily this egotistical, like narcissistic, like, hey, I know what's cool, so you should come to me to see what's cool. It's more just like, oh my God, dude, like I am just as impressed with myself as you are, or you might be like, look how cool this is, and you just start giggling. You just know that it's awesome, and I feel like so much of creation comes from that, and we will always try to come up with a linear like arc or story or or character arc or hero's journey to kind of piece that experience together so that it has a beginning, middle, and end. But I think that there's just something about the human condition and how we like to share and have joint attention towards something and experience something together that drives us to create as well as to enjoy, right? It's this feedback loop of creating, experiencing, smiling with each other that something was so cool, and then wanting to go back to the drawing board to create, to re-experience that in a new way, right? In a fresh way. Even people like us that work in the genre, right? Like in genre work, like sci-fi or cyberpunk or horror movies or slasher films, like we always talk about, like, we love the genre, but we also want to somehow advance the genre or help it evolve or help it grow, or either by creating new ideas or a new premise or just a new angle on what we already love. And so yeah, that's the best way I can kind of describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, yeah. I love the notion that you're talking about in regards to wanting, and that's not for everyone, but it is something that I think we all have. You're showing it right now, but we have it as well that you've talked about, is that we want to challenge ourselves and say, like, okay, that was good, and I'm a fan, or I love it, or whatever, but I want to challenge myself to take that and how can I get it to the next level or the next space, which I've always, found interesting about you because of that. I think us on the team have the same thing. So where do you think you get that? Because, like I said, I'm in entertainment for a long time, and not everybody has it, and that doesn't mean they're not productive and they don't get stuff done. But there's that extra layer that's going. I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it with an extra layer of something different or something better, or what's the next space? Where do you think you get that from?
It's hard to say exactly where it is, but I think that, like, I remember on my first day of film school, my very first class with our first professor. It was film analysis. It was a class that was going to teach us how to analyze, how to watch films, analyze films, pull out and observe symbolism, understand how film works as a language and what it's trying to say. And the professor was like, after this class, you guys are never going to be able to see films the same way. And he said, for some of you, that might be a curse, and because you're going to be able to see how a film is working behind the scenes. How is a director, or how are all aspects of a film working to manipulate your feelings and your emotions? And he said, you know what, like, it can be a curse to some of you guys, and I hope it won't be, and because it could get you jaded. It could get you, in the middle of Star Wars when Darth Vader's fighting Luke Skywalker, you're just like, this is just so, I'm familiar with this trope, I know what's going on, or that music is obviously coming in to make me feel nostalgic, blah, 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 blah. Like, once you understand it, and he said, my hope for you guys is that you don't lose that sense of wonder that so many of you probably have, which prompted you to actually study how films work, And I always just remember him saying that, and I go back to that sometimes when you're in the middle of a film or after the film finishes, and you kind of go back and analyze, like, oh yeah, that one part, or that one arc, or that one line, or that edit, like, how did that make me feel? And I think that since that class, I've encountered many people that work in the industry or don't, that say that they love films, but they can be so critical about movies, and I think it goes back to what that professor said, that, like, when if you could know too much, or at least if you don't protect that inner kid in you, you don't protect that inner kid, that you're going to become a little jaded. And so when you're asking me, like, where does the creative, impulse come from to create something new, I don't know exactly where it comes from, but I know that, like, it would definitely die if you embraced or became too jaded with understanding how all the things work behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. If you were to go back to that film student, what would be the one thing now, knowing what you know, and we'll get into what you're working on now and what's coming down the pipeline. But what's the one thing that you might say right now that there's a film student listening, or an 8-year-old that's, like, getting his, now it's not VHS cameras, right? Now he's making kung fu on his digital phones and digital cameras and Sony FX3 and stuff. What's the one thing that you think would make a difference, that would make you a different Mark Cheng today?
Well, I think what's really important, I think there's this anecdote. It's longer than a quote, because it's a guy named Ira Glass. He talks about how creators, when they start off, part of what gets them started is this feeling inside them that they've got really good taste. They're like, oh, I know what's good. I know what's not good. I know what's good. I know what I really like. And as you're developing as a creator and as an artist, your skill level is not quite at the same level as your taste, right? So like, you're going to think something is like, I have very high standards of what I think is awesome, but then you go and try to make something and you're like, it's not as awesome. Like, I wouldn't even like my own stuff. Like, they get so, a creator in their infancy can get so, down on their skill because it's just not at the same level as their taste. And I feel like that's where a lot of people kind of give up, and they're like, oh yeah, I tried writing, but I didn't even like my own work. Or I shot an indie feature film, but I didn't even finish editing because it was just so bad and not anywhere near what I wanted it to be, and I want it to be like Marvel level, but like it's barely indie level. And I think that like, we have to, as young developing creators, we have to force ourselves to work through those projects because you're always better than the project you just finished, because you've grown so much through that project. And I've just seen way too many people give up because they feel like what they were able to create at any point in time was nowhere near what they wanted it to be, and they think that that's failure. Whereas, people that have worked through it kind of understand you got to trust the process, that all those things get you better and better and better. So, maybe that's my long-winded way of saying to my younger self, like, don't give up, just keep pushing through and look for the good gems in your work. You take fantastic comic book artists, like they all have sketchbooks, and 99% of those sketches in those sketchbooks they don't want anybody to see because they were experiments. They were trying to figure out their style. They were trying really hard to draw a human nose. They were, trying to learn how to do different expressions. They were trying to figure things out. And so especially in this world where everybody's got like a fantastic like 4K iPhone and access to like Instagram, you think you have to share everything that you made? Like, no. You know what? You don't need to share everything. Continue to work on things. If it's not there yet, that's okay. You'll have learned one or two things from each project and just keep going.
Yeah, people forget that 100 bad drawings to make one good drawing.
Yeah.
In art school.
Totally. Yeah. That's what I'd say.
That's success.
Yeah. The learning, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, how could you be as good as making 10 movies without making 10 movies?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, man. I mean, tell people what you're working on now, what they should be on the lookout for. I mean, obviously, we're going to be collaborating on stuff, but yeah, so that way people can follow you and go check out your Instagram and stuff. Yeah, give them a quick rundown of what you're pumping out.
Sure. Well, with Max Beyond being out now, I'm really excited the world gets to see, the work that our small team really put so much energy into in order to create. I'm in a similar situation right now under NDA. I can't talk about it, but I'm just really excited about this game that I'm working on. I'm on the cinematics team, so working on all of the cinematic storytelling that happens between levels, and within power-ups and all of that type of work. Really excited and can't wait till I can actually, talk about what that project is. In addition, I'm working on a personal project with my creative partner Larry Hama, who writes the G.I. Joe comic. It's a project called Cagers, and it's kind of like a murder mystery set in the future. A whole bunch of retired military cyborgs are being murdered, and their parts are being scavenged for some reason. And our main character has to kind of figure out why all these different mechanical body parts are being stolen. Somebody is stealing parts to build some type of Frankenstein, and there's a big reveal at the end as to what that person's plan is. So it's an animated series. It's 8 episodes. I'm working on the pilot right now. It'll be done completely in Unreal Engine, in 3D, and it's kind of a fun project. I'm doing a lot of motion capture and voice recordings right now with actors. And they can see little glimpses of that on my Instagram account.
Yeah, tell everybody where they can find you before we go. Yeah, so we'd love for people to, check out your work. Mark's a cool soul, man. Good dude and talented.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Follow along for updates and reach out to me. Happy to meet people and talk to people, especially if you're interested in 3D animation and mocap technology. I am on Instagram at Mark Cheng Creative Studios.
Awesome. Well, can't say enough, man. Thank you so much, Kenji. And I just appreciate you so much, man, and for making time to share your journey, and hope to have you back, man. You're a good dude.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Pleasure to be talking to you guys.
Absolutely, man. Much love, and until next time, my friend.
All right. Take care.
All right. The Shepherds, we're out.